Hey, everybody. I am here today with Dr. Elias Nader from the University of Baltimore, which is super fun because I have to give a shout out to our mutual student, London Smith, who went from St. Vincent to you. So that's exciting. But Elias, if you want to give us some background about yourself.
Sure, yeah. So I am in my second year at the University of Baltimore as an assistant professor. I've got two kind of main research areas. The first is within life course and developmental criminology, and I focus on the kind of transition to adulthood and the role that that plays in the desistance process. And the second area is centered around policing, and I've done a lot of work in program implementation and evaluation for police organizations, as well as shifts in organizational culture through that process, and then some surveys around community perceptions of police.
Which is really, I think, important work now, right? Like the community police relationship issue and how we navigate that. And I appreciate that you're a program and policy wonk. I teach courses in that too. So this is super exciting. So why don't you tell us what you picked and why? Because I think this is baffling to a lot of people.
Sure. So the clips that I picked were about a couple, Elizabeth and Andre, and Elizabeth also goes by Libby for people who don't watch the show. But Andre is from Moldova, so they met in Ireland, I believe, and kind of hit it off. He ended up coming to the U.S. on a 90-day K-1 visa, and they got married. There's been some tension between Andre and Libby's family, and in these clips, they're now in Moldova, where Andre and Libby are having a second wedding for Andre's family and friends. So in the clips, Elizabeth's family is talking to one of Andre's friends about why he left Moldova and potentially how this is related to his position as a police officer in Moldova.
Yeah, so these are really interesting because there are a lot of like crime related issues kind of in the 90-day fiance world. So this is really interesting. But I think one of the things is that we've seen in 90-day fiance is kind of this skepticism from American families that are concerned that people are being taken advantage of by people from other countries, which is also probably a larger discussion that everyone should have.
Yes.
Yeah. But you want to just jump right in and get to this first clip?
Sure, let's do it.
Both of us were actually expecting something else from that job.
So why did he quit?
He wanted to continue his job, but he couldn't anymore because they just wanted to replace him because he wouldn't do something else like another job.
I heard that police officers here, like you can pay them off for stuff. Was he like a stand-up police officer or was he like corrupt?
How can I say he was corrupt or not? I mean, that's how we work in here. Sometimes we just break laws. And that's it. I mean,
Even the cops break laws here?
yeah.
And so after that, he moved to Ireland? Why did he move to Ireland?
They were pushing him so much, so he had to leave.
He had to leave, or else what? What if he stayed?
He could get in trouble, in a worse trouble. They could set up him.
Set him up to go to jail?
Yeah.
Marcel is telling us that Andre was basically forced to leave the country. So something had to happen. He had to do something. Like, your country doesn't just try to make you leave for no reason. So there's something that he's not telling us.
Was it because he didn't want to play along with whatever they were doing? So he was like, no, I'm not doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that, dude. You almost make it seem like you guys were the honest ones working in a corrupt police force.
Believe me or not, but that's the truth, yeah. Here in Moldova, whole police system is rotten. There's nothing you can do. When you start dancing,
It's interesting here because in this
you cannot just
clip,
fight with big people.
essentially, Marcel, who is Andre's friend from Moldova, was on the police force with him, is talking about his experiences on the police force and how they could be forcing you into doing something, and like if that's the command that you got from your officer, you follow that command even if it's not what you want to do, or maybe not, you know, okay, maybe it's a little bit illegal, whatever. And kind of what I take out of this is the skepticism that comes from Libby's brother, who's like, well, I just don't buy that. And I wonder how much of that is his views on American policing translating into what policing looks like in other countries. And I'm not an expert in international policing by any means, but I think there's definitely some projection there from Libby's brother onto what he thinks police work is like in Moldova.
Right. I think that's a really American idea too, to take our interpretations of law and government and apply it to other
Mhm.
countries and saying this is how it is here, therefore it must be like this in other countries.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It was interesting too that the Libby's family, her father, her brother, and her sister met up with this man who was her husband's friend without him present to ask.
Hmm. Yeah, and they had, so her brother and her father had met him at a dinner maybe like a day or two earlier. I'm not sure what the timelines are when TLC splices everything together, but they had met him once previously. So I guess they had reached out to him and said, hey, can we just meet and have this conversation? My assumption is some of this is probably facilitated by TLC,
Right.
connecting people's numbers and scheduling events. So I think that definitely plays into it a lot. But in the previous context with her family and Andre, there's been a lot of poking into Andre and his past and whether or not he's worthy of marriage to Libby, whether or not he's like a good husband or a good father.
Mhm. If he wants to work, I think there was a lot of discussion about his employment, and that's really like the crux of the issue. So when this popped up, I'm like, oh, good, we're not talking about his job and working for his father-in-law anymore.
Yes, yeah.
Uh, but it's interesting to hear the perspective from this friend Marcel to say, you don't know what it's like here, and police break the law. Which again, we could also just bring back to American perceptions of police.
Yeah, and I definitely think it's a little bit more of a modern day perspective that police don't break the law in the United States. I would not say that that was necessarily the view of US citizens in the 80s and before. I mean, I'm just thinking about like huge events with like New York police and a lot of the corruption that was kind of embedded in there. So it's not that foreign of a concept to the United States context. It's just, I think, maybe foreign to some people in today's policing context.
Right. I mean, even with policing history, when we think about like big, huge crime families and having police in the pocket, like,
Yeah.
That's from a policing 101 course that you
Yeah.
got like early 19th century into like the mid 19th century or 18th or 20th century, I'm sorry. That we seem to have a very short-term memory about this. I
Yeah.
think how divided attitudes are about police now too. Yeah. So do you want to watch the second clip where Andre kind of explains himself?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this gives more, perspective. And it seems a little bit more fair that he can actually defend himself.
Yes, it definitely does.
So just to be clear again, I would just want to remind people that Libby and Andre did get married in the United States. So that's why she's referring to him as her husband. And then it's their wedding in Moldova, like you said.
Well, Andre, I wanted to ask you about a family issue. Your friend, Marcel?
Marcel, yes.
That's one of your good friends?
Yeah.
So my brother reached out to him, and we actually met up with him, so I got to meet him. What? Yeah. Why?
What you want to know? Like, what are you investigating?
You guys work together. We were hoping that we would talk to him and just kind of ask him more about how you grew up and what you guys did.
You should have brought Marcel here, and after this, like, we should have talked, because that's my friends, and we'll not tell you.
What he told us really worried me. say you were forced out of your country? That's what he said.
Yeah.
Just genuine shock on Libby's
True,
face.
right?
Yeah.
Is it true?
And you can see
You were
how
forced?
stressed Andre is too.
What are they talking about?
Tell us your side of the story. Did you get
Because it's
forced out of
not,
the
I mean,
police
the issue,
force? Yes, I was for. Yes, I left. Yeah.
as we kind of see through this clip, is like
Why? What are you afraid
being
of?
forced out of his
We
country
don't want to come to your country.
is not, it's kind of an oversimplification of what happened.
We're like, wait, what?
Right.
Because it seems like he was,
Every time that I meet with them,
he
trying to
left
do something to
policing
peace.
because,
Like,
as he's saying now,
we came here
he's
for
trying to
a
do
way
something. I know that he's talking there about
behind my back.
the wedding. So he's saying through this clip that he is leaving policing because of the corruption, how he doesn't want to engage at the level that they want him to in this corruption. And I wouldn't, he doesn't necessarily say that, like, you know, they packed his bags and sent him out of the country. Like, that's not, but that's kind of where they're taking it. So it's a little bit of a disconnect there. Like, yeah, he was potentially forced off of the police force, but maybe not out of his country. And that they're very focused on the why were you forced out of your country portion.
Right. That he wasn't exiled.
Yes, yeah. Because
Yeah.
then the questions come up like, how are you even able to be back here? He's
Mhm.
not, you know, he's not like again, exiled by any means.
Right. But I like this quote where he says you have to play the game or get out. So
Yeah.
it's almost like he just didn't have a choice, and he chose the moral decision to not engage in police corruption.
Right.
So
But he's still being blamed for even being associated with that system, right? They're still questioning him and saying there's more to the story than what he's telling us. Well, clearly there is more to the story. He's saying there's more to the story and I didn't want to be a part of it, and it's not good enough for them.
Right. It's almost like her sister starts to understand, like,
Mm-hmm.
for a second, and they kind of get to where they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to put food on the table. This is a job. It's not paying a lot. You can make more money with corruption. Her brother still does not seem to be buying this.
No, I don't think that Andre could say anything to bring her brother on board. Her father and her sister kind of seem to understand the major issue that's going on, but her brother is really the one that is like so against him as a person. And to me, like, it's getting a little bit beyond the job part of it. I think we could probably stop the clip here. But her brother does not want to buy anything that Andre is saying. I don't think there's anything that Andre could do to kind of convince him that he is a good person or a good husband to his sister. And I have a hard time separating that from the fact that he is from Moldova and from the things that Charlie said while he was in Moldova about their country, their food, their culture. And to me, like, I just keep thinking about the limits that exist within whiteness, which is a huge topic. I mean, maybe not huge, but it is a well discussed research topic in sociology, and how not all whiteness is equivalent. And he's kind of drawing a line in the sand here, right? Like, to him, being from Moldova, living in Moldova makes you different than what white looks like in his eyes in the United States. So I have a hard time separating that from everything that Charlie says about Andre, and that trickles into kind of how he views the police force as well. It's like, well, why did you even join that system if you knew they were corrupt or whatever? Like, obviously he's lying because he got into bigger trouble than he's saying. He's not trustworthy. Kind of,
Right.
yeah.
He's reading between all these lines, and that narrative is kind of being created by this distrust of somebody who's not from America, essentially.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. I also think when they say, like, oh, so you were framed, I don't know if that's the right term here.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think it is, they're applying the terminology they have to try to describe the incident they're focused on. But yeah, it doesn't sound like he was necessarily framed for anything. It just, he very plainly says, they asked me to do something, I didn't want to do it, so I left the job, got
Right.
fired, whatever, like however you want to think of it, like
Mhm.
they asked him to do something, and whether it was his choice or he got forced out of the police department, he's telling you he made a morally good choice,
Mhm.
and it resulted in something that they see as being undesirable, in being forced out of your job and being forced to leave your home country.
Yeah, and especially when he says too that like I don't know how it would have gone. I would have either been in jail or I could have been a very rich man.
Yes, yeah. He
Like
used that
corruption could have
example.
worked out well for him.
Yeah. And I think that is so relatable when you think about the history of police corruption and police being in the pocket of politicians or whoever, that it worked out well for them because oftentimes they were rewarded monetarily and were able to buy things. So, that it ideally should be something that translates well into kind of the American narrative and thinking about that history. And that's something that, and this is a little tangent, but like something that we see in popular culture all the time. Like even if you think about something like the Batman series, right? And Gotham and the corruption in Gotham.
Mhm.
And it's so embedded in there how much police corruption there is and people being in the pocket of different politicians or powerful families in the city. So it's not like a super out there concept, right? It's not something that should be super foreign to an American.
Right. These ideas of rogue cops and corruption are in pop culture
Mhm.
everywhere.
Yeah.
On another tangent, like I argue that Elliot Stabler is a terribly bad police officer. That he's overly violent, right? And he breaks the law all the time.
Mhm.
Um, so this shouldn't be, maybe a pun intended, a foreign concept to people.
Yeah.
Um, but still, I think, like you said, they're just looking for any reason to just really hate on Andre
Yeah.
and
I
to just
don't think,
judge.
yeah, I don't think it's about policing. I don't think it's about his abilities as a person. I mean, again, to me, like I can't take it out of the context of this is a person who is not American and not white enough for our family. What is he doing here? How can we justify our thoughts?
Yeah. And I'm also really more curious about Moldova now, in that he can go on television and just talk about police corruption. And I'm wondering if there's any possible backlash to this, because in certain
Yeah.
countries there might be.
Yes, absolutely. That's something that I've seen in a lot of couples where people are doing things on TV that they explicitly say they can't be doing because they'll get in trouble for it. And we saw this a lot, I think, at the beginning with some of the earlier couples.
Mhm.
And Azan and Nicole comes to mind for that particularly because he emphasizes a lot like we can't sleep in the same hotel room because we're not married and things like that. But then they both kind of acknowledge that like maybe even though they have separate hotel rooms, they don't necessarily stay in them.
Mhm.
And I wonder kind of what the implication is of things like this coming back on the people who are a part of this TV show, their families.
Right. And if people understand the implications for this, um, I think we saw the same with, was it Laura and Samit, when he could have gone to jail for having an affair with her, essentially.
Yes.
Um, I don't have,
Jenny.
I'm
Jenny
sorry,
and Samit.
Jenny. I'm
Yeah.
also confusing Laura and Aladdin. There's so many.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, it seems like there would be kind of outside problems that this could result in. So I guess they're okay now, though. I haven't heard anything about the Moldovan government coming after Andre.
Yeah, no. I'm sure it's probably a pretty small fish to fry
Yeah.
in that regard.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for this. I think I'm going to spend the rest of the day, either watching the news or Googling Moldovan police corruption.
Yeah.
But no, thanks so much. I really do appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.